Hi everyone, and welcome to this cozy, spooky episode of Dystopian Simulation Radio. If you're a first-time listener, I usually host with Chris. Yes, we are around a campfire today. We are in the forest. We do this every Halloween at DSR. So, today, you're stuck with me, just me. And I know it's only September, but I was feeling in the Halloween spirit today, so I thought I would kick off spooky season early with a storytelling style episode of something that I happened upon this week. Before we start, I'd like to say a special thanks to our Patreons for all your support. So today's story takes place in a small village in Cumbria, England. A village named Croglin. Croglin, a quaint and quiet village in the picturesque Cumbrian countryside, is set on the fell side between the Pennines and the River Eden. In the early 1930s, it had a population of less than 200 people. We're going to go a bit further back in time, to 1874. The account of this story was first recorded by a writer named Augustus Hare, which was told to him by a man named Captain Edward Fisher, who was said to have owned a farmhouse property known as Croglin Grange. Croglin Grange was a one-storey property with a large and open terrace and views of a church off in the distance. It had been owned by the Fisher family and had been in the family for generations. But as the Fisher family grew larger, the house felt smaller, and eventually they relocated, renting the Grange out to 3 siblings, 2 brothers and a sister, who were well liked in the small community. Some accounts name the siblings as Edward, Michael, and Amelia Cranswell. One very hot and stifling night that summer, after the siblings had retired back to the house, the sister found that she couldn't fall asleep. Her window was closed, but the shutters were open, so she looked out and could see the moon hanging in the sky. As she looked outside, something else caught her attention. 2 lights hovering between a patch of trees that marked the perimeter at the end of the back lawn, annexing it from a nearby churchyard. She watched, frozen in horror, as the lights grew larger and emerged from the tree line, accompanied by a looming, shadowy figure that grew bigger and bigger with every step closer, moving at a rapid pace. She was unable to scream and alert her brothers for help. Instead, she was rendered almost paralyzed with despair and fear, but found herself unable to look away. The shadow disappeared around the side of the house, giving her a split second of relief that was only replaced with terror at the sound of scratching at her window. Thankfully, the window was locked, but the scratching continued, only to be replaced by a relentless picking sound. The figure, whatever it was picking away at the window, picking at the lead seals that held in place the diamond-thatched glass panels with its finger, until one of the diamond pieces eventually fell inside to the floor. The sister could only watch from her bed, unable to believe her eyes, as a long, thin finger protruded through the gap, unlocking the window latch. At once, he, or it, spilled through the window and crossed the threshold of the room. She could only watch, a prisoner in her own statue of a body, as the figure got closer and closer to the bed. As he approached, she noticed the skin on his face was shriveled and dark, his eyes almost glowing in the moonlit room. He grabbed a handful of her hair, pulled his face closer to hers, and sunk his teeth into her throat, biting down until she bled. The pain broke the spell, and she began to scream, causing her brothers to wake from their slumber and run to her room, pulling at the locked door to get inside. When they eventually did, the figure had bundled himself out of the unlocked window and was running across the back lawn into the trees. One of the brothers stayed with his sister, who was no longer conscious and was bleeding heavily from the wound on her throat, while the other tried to chase the figure down, losing it quickly to the shadows. He was simply unable to keep up. The siblings discussed the ordeal at length, with the sister concluding that the only logical answer was that a man must have escaped from a nearby asylum and broken through a window to attack her. Although she seemed to deal with the trauma of being attacked by an unknown male assailant in the quiet Cumbrian village, her brother decided, on advice of the local doctor, to take her for a vacation to Switzerland. The wounds from the attack healed with time, and the sister busied her mind with other pastimes for the rest of the summer. By autumn, she was eager to return to her Croglin home. She rationalized that, although the criminal was not caught or identified, it was unlikely that he would return to the scene of the crime. He was a passing criminal, she told her brothers. He wouldn't return. The brothers stayed in the room across from their sister with loaded guns for protection, and she stayed in her original room, with the only difference being that she covered her window, saved for a gap at the very top to let some light in. Autumn and winter had came and went without incident, and before they knew it, leaves began to grow on the trees, and it was spring again. All was well, until one night in March, when to her horror, the sister was roused from a peaceful slumber by that familiar sound of scratching on the window pane. Her eyes shot open, instinctively fixed on the small, exposed window pane, where her gaze was met with glowing eyes. Her brothers awoke to the blood-curdling screams and bundled out of their shared room, guns in hand. They chased the man down the garden at great speed, determined not to lose him this time. One shot was fired, hitting the man in the leg. He hobbled on through the trees, throwing himself over the church wall with the brothers still in pursuit. They watched as he attempted to conceal himself in an old family crypt in the church cemetery. Determined to put an end to the culprit's reign of terror over their sister, they rallied together the neighborhood at daylight, and together they opened the crypt. Inside, the coffins of the family who owned the vault had been ripped open, and their bodies spilled out in a scene of disarray. As the horrified tenants inspected the coffins, they noticed one with the lid loosely sitting on top to conceal the contents within. When they lifted it, the assailant was laying inside, the wounded leg clearly visible, his skin dark and dried like a walnut, almost mummified. The very man who had been at their sister's window the night before. The man was burned to dust the following day. The author who published the account ended the story with, "They did the only thing that can lay a vampire. They burnt it." Alright, I hope you enjoyed the campfire story. Now let's get in to the actual case. So, I'm not entirely sure if it came across at the beginning that we were talking about a vampire or a revenant or a ghoul, a fiend, whatever you want to call it. It almost feels like a true crime story until the bite on the neck. But yeah, this is one of the earlier vampire stories before all of the Penny Dreadfuls and Gothic tales and things like that came later on. Vampire stories in England, I would say, I believe before that they were sort of a Eastern European thing. They're sort of an import, although you would, like, a lot of people associate vampires in England and horror and Gothic stories, but I actually think that came a bit later. So before that, it was more of like undead beings, revenants, sort of demons, things like that. So I got really interested in this case when I first read about it. I didn't know about it actually, and the location of this place isn't too far from where I was born, where Chris and I were born. So yeah, I was very surprised to find it. I'm not sure what he would think about it, and I wanted to know if there was any kind of truth to it, because if this is one of the earlier stories, okay, the guy who wrote it, I'm sure he traveled around and he brought a lot of stories back with him. I mean, he was a writer. Apparently, he didn't write about many interesting things. That's not my opinion. I haven't read the rest of his work. But he did have a lot of these ghost stories, sort of like second-hand tales sprinkled throughout his work. That's what I've read. I haven't read any of his stuff, so don't quote me on that. But is there even a kernel of truth to this? Like, 'cause folklore, you know, obviously, I don't want to say obviously vampires aren't real. We have a lot of different types of listeners. But maybe we have some vampires listening right now. I don't know. Feel free to email in if you can type with those nails. But when did vampires become hot, actually? Was that an Anne Rice thing? When did that start happening? I actually have a friend who, no, I'm not going to go into that story. I don't have a hot vampire friend, but I wish I did. Anyways, I really wish Chris was here to keep me on track. But what the fuck was I saying? Anyways, I was wondering if there was even a kernel of truth to this, if these places existed and everything like that. So this account was first printed in 1900, so a long time after the actual story. And it was told to him by Captain Edward Fisher Rowe while they had dinner together. The captain wasn't heavy on the facts or maybe he was. This was written a long time after for some reason. So people were eager to see if there was any evidence, records, etc. to back up this story. And Croglin isn't the biggest place, as we said earlier. So over the years, a few people have actually investigated it. In different ways, I would say. So there's one writer and researcher named Charles G. Harper, and he actually tried to verify the people and places mentioned in this account. And in his 1942 book, Haunted Houses, he detailed that after his investigation of going around Croglin, that he found no evidence that a place named Croglin Grange had ever existed. So he publishes this, and everyone's like, boo. Enter another bloke, F. Clive Ross. He wrote an article for Tomorrow magazine about this story. And Ross did a little extra digging and he discovered that Croglin Low Hall, which is another place in Croglin, so there's Croglin High Hall and Croglin Low Hall. And he discovered that Croglin Low Hall was once actually called Croglin Grange much earlier, so I would say around 1700s, 1600s. He determined that it was once a one-level property that was likely built up to have a second level later on. So Charles G. Harp had actually visited Croglin Low Hall, and he just looked at it and went, it's got 2 stories, there's no church, it's not that place, it's none of these places, it's made up. But F. Clive Ross, along with another guy called Richard Whittington Egan, now he dug up records and Ross wrote about it. So together they kind of put the pieces of this folklore together. And they did actually find something really interesting, which creeped me out a little bit, I'm not going to lie. Whittington Edgar went on to confirm the places as well as the people. So he found out that there was a Fisher family, which I think we are to presume was the family of Captain Fisher, from whom Hare, the author, had originally heard the story. And they did live in Croglin Low Hall, in 1809. There's this fantastic talk that you can watch on YouTube too. It's titled The Haunted Landscape, the Croglin Grange Vampire. And there's photographs in a slideshow of a presentation in that video of what I assume is the actual side of the story, where you can see this bricked up window there's like an outline, a sort of white chalk outline, or like kind of Beetlejuice-esque. And you can tell a window was once there, and then like hanging on it is like a bunch of horseshoes just covering it, nailed there or something. So it's likely that Croglin Grange did exist, and that was it. Although it's in a slightly different area. I think it's about 2 miles from the place that everyone thinks it is, but it isn't. There's an actual church in Croglin that still stands. It was built a lot later, but yeah, everyone assumed it was that place, and they were like, it doesn't make sense. There was never any house there. There's no cemetery backing onto it. But there actually was a cemetery before with a property next to it that was later built off, and it has a bricked up window. So if you're anywhere near Cumbria in the United Kingdom, or you visit England and you want a little spooky road trip, definitely check that out. There's a lot of other haunted places around that area too, especially York. I think that's the most haunted city in England, probably after London. Who knows? But yeah, I do find it kind of a bit strange that there's absolutely no records of an entire village coming together to burn what they believed was some sort of ghoul. But I mean, I know the church were keeping records at the time, and I'm sure they were involved, so I think it's slightly weird that this story never showed up in anything there. But who knows? I mean, there was the Civil War. I think that church was destroyed in this. Oh, yeah, exactly. The church was destroyed around the Civil War, the War of the Three Kingdoms in England. And I think that, when was that? 1600s? I'm going to Google that real quick just to make sure. Yes, so the War of the Three Kingdoms was a series of conflicts that was fought between 1639 and 1653 in the kingdoms of England, Scotland, and Ireland. So, yeah, I think this church was destroyed in that. So maybe there was records. And if that church survived, maybe there would be a fantastic, like, one of those big illustrated books with amazing drawings of this vampire, and it would be the biggest story ever in vampire mythology and folklore. And oh, we could only wish, but all we have is his account sprinkled in a book about just random rich people that he knew, apparently. So yeah, that's what we have. But I hope you enjoyed this shorter solo episode, just to keep you going until Chris is ready to join us again from the warp hole that he jumped into. It happens now and again, everybody. You always get a solo episode from me at some point in the year. I hope this will tide you over, and I hope you're starting to get into the spooky season mode. I'm definitely into it, like, right now. Last year I wasn't feeling it very much at all, but this year I'm going ham. I have so many plans. Yeah. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. And if you have any local folklore stories from the town that you live in, or, you know, if you live in a small village and there's like one of these stories that you don't think other people would know and you'd like to share, please contact us. You can DM us on Instagram. We have an email, but we really check it, I'm not going to lie. But if you just DM us on Instagram, you could send like an audio file telling your story and we could play it on the podcast. So if that's something you want to do, go ahead. And maybe we can collect them and put out a Halloween episode. That would be nice. But people are usually a bit scared to do that. Don't feel scared to do it and don't think your story's boring. Just go for it. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening and joining me around this campfire. And see you next time in the dystopian simulation. Bye.